Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. And Arlen, are we okay? Can you hear me and everything?
Yes, your sound is good and your video is on.
All right, great. I'm really excited about sharing this presentation that has been a work in the last several months to gather information from various people about the COVID chaos situation. And the IASA and the IPA are jointly presenting this. I want to dedicate this presentation to two of my friends who have been victims. They died from COVID. Many of you probably know Scott Helton, superintendent, and Diane Kuzmal was an early childhood educator up in the East Dubuque area. We all know people, I'm sure, who have passed away from COVID. It's nothing that we can take lightly. It has changed our lives, and we are doing an excellent job in education, I believe, with the COVID situation. So I want to talk about how you survive COVID chaos and how you can do this while keeping sane, staying out of jail, and providing A+ leadership. Before I begin, you probably have seen this video, but this was a video that came out when we started going to home learning. It was a teacher, and she put this video out on how I am handling online teaching. Watch this.
Hey, so as some of you guys might know, I'm a music teacher, and I found that one of the best ways that I can process the whole transition to online learning and teaching is to write a song. So I wrote a song. I'd like to share that with you guys now. Here we go.
And that's exactly how we felt. Let me see here. I can't. That's exactly how we felt when this happened to us. And we went last spring, we went into online learning, and we were forced to close schools, and we were doing things differently. And I think just everybody felt like screaming out loud. And then we were hit with Zoom, and we had to learn how to teach with Zoom, meet with Zoom, practically exist with Zoom. And it kind of reminded me of a quote that I really love. It's a quote that is shared frequently by Superintendent Kent Bugg, and it's a quote that their family uses when they're dealing with Megan, their daughter, who's had childhood cancer for going on 7 years now. Life is not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. And that's kind of what happened to us. We had this storm, but we had to learn how to live in that storm. And by the way, when you get a copy of this presentation, and the only way that you're going to get anything really out of this presentation, I think, is to get a copy and go into detail on many of the slides that I'm going to be going over rather quickly. And if you do, click onto the Megan Bugg's journey and read about this amazing girl. She's an inspiration to everybody. So when I was thinking about how am I going to share this information, I remembered this Bible verse, ask, seek, and knock. And so I did. I went to superintendents all across the state, and I asked them to tell me 3 things that they did to survive the COVID chaos. And what I really said was, there's many things that you're doing, but list 3 things that you think would be most helpful for other superintendents. And I spent 30 to 60 minutes with each one of these superintendents, just getting information, just talking to them about what's working in their district. I'm going to go through these very quickly. But what I did was I shrunk their 3 things into 3 short statements, and they've all approved my shrinking process, so to speak. So let's just take a look, and we're going to see some repeating things that I think are very important for you to know. Jennifer, pick your battles, take care of yourself, refer to your core values. John Bartlett up in Bloomingdale, take care of yourself. Many people said, if you're going to survive this, you have to be in good shape. You know, nobody's happy if mama ain't happy. Well, the district can't run well if the superintendent is not functioning well. It's extremely important that you put yourself into the position of taking care of yourself. And many, many people said, be a good communicator. John said, be kind and compassionate. And God knows that people need it under these circumstances. Daryl Hogue up in Riverbend, know the data from all sources, not just learn it, but know it. Know it so that you can repeat it, so that you become an expert in it. And then Daryl said, communicate, communicate, communicate. And he listed all the ways that they're doing it in their district. And he again said something that I think was more of a personal, passionate type thing. Encourage others, build a healthy mindset. And here's a quote that he said that I just thought stood alone. This is a time to lead. And I think back to all the years that I was a superintendent, about 80, and there were times when you had an opportunity to make a difference, and there were times when you just were maintaining things. This is a time when superintendents have an opportunity to make a difference and to lead. Extremely important. Adam Dean, you can't do this alone. Utilize resources. He suggested, and he's a relatively new superintendent, call your attorney, get advice for the things that you don't necessarily know how to do because you've never done them before. And again, Adam said, it's so important that you communicate well. Chris Doherty at Taylorsville, she's phenomenally organized. And just so I don't forget, you see it says Tommy TV on Facebook. If you would go to Tommy TV on Facebook, you can see some of the fantastic things that Taylorville has done to deal with this, and the great plan they put together to make a difference when they move to online learning. And Chris says, utilize a cross-section, rely on administrator meetings. And again, you're going to see this one appear many times. Build that strong relationship with the health department. Dale says, listen to everyone. Listen to everyone. He's a great communicator and a great listener. And when he says listen, he means stop talking, focus, and listen. Hear them. Dig into the data, communicate, be transparent. Jill says, establish a great relationship with the health department. Jill shared something that they did in their district that she thought was extremely helpful. And that is they utilize seating charts. Now she's a high school district, and the seating charts throughout the district that were put in place allowed them to do quick attendance and see who wasn't there because maybe they decided to go online at home or whatever. She found it to be very helpful. And again, many superintendents said this, it's allowed administrators and teachers to find the most important parts of the curriculum. What are the things that kids really need to know? Joe in Richland says, be transparent. Don't hide data. If you have data, share it. Even if you don't like it, even if it's something the community is going to balk about, they need to know the data. And he has a great number of meetings and town meetings and gets input from stakeholders on a regular basis. And Joe said, one of the most important things to stay sane and get through this COVID situation is to be as consistent as possible. Maintain that consistency. If you say something, do it. If you're going to change it, tell them why and be consistent with the change. Steve Smith says to communicate again, communicate. And then he says he needs to have this strong relationship with the school board. The school board has to be behind you, has to work with you. And I've never seen a situation where superintendents are more in line with the fact that the superintendent needs to let them lead. This is not a time for micromanagement. And you have to build that relationship with them. And then, of course, he says, work together with the staff on a daily basis. Alex up in Eastland says, and he's a new superintendent, and he says, one of the things that's helped him the most is to network with other superintendents. Just pick up the phone, and if you're going to be doing something, call and get some help, and don't be alone. Again, transparent communications. And he says how important it is to be healthy, to take those walks, to have downtime with your family, to prioritize things, to take care of yourself. Angela and Fulton work together, support each other, focus on new discoveries. And you're going to see this when we move off of this section of the presentation. The new discoveries are the exciting part of COVID. Yeah, there's some good things that have come out of the COVID chaos. And she says to focus on those new things. And she emphasizes building that strong community support. It was really fun talking to the different superintendents and hearing how many of them related that in a lot of cases, people were more agreeable, worked better with them during this crisis than they had before. Steve says, know the needs of each student And that means this is a time when you really need to know what a student is going through, because they're all going through a different form of acceptance. Some of them a different form of hell, and some of them a different form of just realization of what they can and can't do. And when you have a handle on who that student is, you have a handle on what their needs are. He also says to be flexible. And Steve says this is a time when technology is taking over, and he says to utilize it. And he shared a whole list of new things that they've put into their district, like swivel cameras and mobile Macs. And he says to embrace those. Doug in Lawrence County says one of the things that they found was very helpful was just jump right into providing training for remote learning. And a lot of districts said they took years of moving to one-on-one and compressed it into months. And they were forced to do it, and it was really helpful. Another thing that's very common is the digital connections, or I could call it the digital divide, when you have a certain percentage of your student body that just doesn't have the digital opportunities. They don't have the band length, they don't even have any form of the web at their house or a network. And this is something that a lot of superintendents have said has really helped them to get through this. And then again, he says to communicate, and he shared all the different levels that they communicate with. Glenn up in Rockton says, know and set expectations. People work better when they know what's expected of them. And he shared ways in which they work together to set some of these expectations. Again, he talked about consistency in the communication process. And then he added something that was rather unique, and that is when you have quarantine procedures, they need to be definitive. People need to know what exactly is going to take place when they have to be in quarantine. Mike Lindy up at AFC said, you have to be pragmatic when you follow the rules. And of course, he said, build that relationship with the health department, but you have to follow those rules, and you have to use those rules to be your guide. And again, communicate and build a strong team with all those people. Dave and Maringo, take care of yourself, how strong it was. But he also added the codicil, if you take care of yourself, remember to enable others to be able to take care of themselves as well, and realize the importance that the teachers and staff members have of being able to take care of themselves. Balance the needs of the staff and the students, build personal relationships. And he also added, when you exit for home learning, you really need to have developed already your reentry plan. So if you're going to close down the school and go to home learning, people want to know what's going to happen, and maybe not when, but what's going to happen when they re-enter. He was pretty emphatic about that. Terry and Heron says, be transparent, build ownership, get people on board. And he added one, don't get discouraged, because it's so easy to get discouraged, especially when the rules change and the situations change. And in some areas where it's just really a sad situation with COVID. But he says to be slow to react and listen and be that calming person. And then he added, he said, it's so important. You need to be the one that's an encouragement to everybody else. Lisa and Streeter says, and lean on other superintendents. This was a common one. Work closely with your association, because this is a time when the association and the administration and the board should be one team working for one cause. And it built, and she says, build that strong relationship with the health department. Hudsonville, Superintendent Julie Kramer, the only superintendent I know is also the school resource officer. She's an amazing woman, does an amazing job there. She says, know your community, have town meetings, do whatever it is to understand your community. And she has a community that was a little bit different than others that were reporting to me. And she needed to work with them. And she says, your staff needs to be on board with all the decisions, and you need to be the expert. You need to do your homework. Lauren Bailey, an outstanding superintendent near the Peoria area, said, it's easy to get overwhelmed, and it is. I heard that from so many superintendents. Sometimes you You just walk in, close your door and sit down and you go, what in the heck is going on? And he says, don't, just realize that you can do this. He says, look at every piece of the puzzle so that you don't get overwhelmed, and work on every piece separately, and it will all come together. And he is a great example of a good communicator, a good mitigator, and a good person to promote cooperation. Scott says, listen to the people on the left, listen to the people on the right, and he has them in his community. And he says, work towards getting them all to realize what has to be done has to be done. Again, ask other superintendents, and he says, embrace technology. And I just had to write down one of his quotes: toe dippers in tech are now in the pool. I thought that was so funny because I heard it from so many superintendents, teachers that hated or didn't want to have anything to do with tech. Some of them are now very capable and very confident. It's made a change in that. Dan Cox in Rochester have a clear set of priorities. He's a great communicator and listener, and Dan is a great one to say, take care of yourself. And he would be the first to make sure that other people were taking care of themselves as well. Brad Skirtish up in Collinsville, be visible in the buildings, listen, meet, talk. In other words, be out there. He has a very huge district, and he says, be out there, be available, listen, let people know that you're in touch. Again, take care of yourself. Again, communicate. So you get the feeling when I talk to these folks of what it is that they sense you need to do. Seek, ask, and the door will be open to you. And I think those things, if you go back and look at those slides, and if anything kind of touches you, feel free to contact. Every one of them said that they're open to being contacted. I had a great conversation with the superintendent of the Rockford Public Schools is Dr. Aaron Jarrett. He's just a phenomenal guy. He's one of my favorites. And he's a guy that just leads by example. And when I was talking to Aaron about the things, Aaron came up with a phrase, and the phrase was disruptive innovations. And I just fell in love with that phrase. And I said, can I steal this and use it? And he says, sure. And I said, let me make sure I understand what it means. Disruptive innovations means in this time of disruption, when things really have gone pretty wacko, you found things that are good. You found innovations during the disruption. And he said, absolutely. And we've focused on disruptive innovations. So when I talked to all the people that I interviewed, and by the way, there were more than I was able to report here in this presentation. I asked them, I said, can you come up with anything that has come out of COVID that has been good? And for the most part, I would say 95% of them just started yapping right away. Only a few had to stumble a little bit because maybe they were mired in a little bit more negativity than the rest. But I said, could you list some disruptive innovations? Well, Aaron started it out, and he says, oh, I can list 5 right off the top of my head. He said, we have WinWin Wednesdays. On Wednesdays, kids get special help in any area. Now, Rockford is the second largest school district in the state, I believe, or it's up there in the top 3 or 4. And he has many, many schools. And in each school, they have special help comes in on Wednesdays to provide help for kids. It's called WinWin Wednesdays. He said they went to one-on-one in a spectacular form of momentum. It was just kind of like, boom, they were working on it and they were there, and they had a foundation in place, but they really put it into gear, and teachers were the reason. They just made it work. He says there won't be any more snow days in Rockford, and Rockford's up north and they have a lot of them. They will now be online learning days, and that changes the game for just about everybody. Rockford had drive-up IT help. This was amazing to me. Drive-up IT help in certain locations for parents to just drive up and ask questions. They could bring computers, they could bring a phone, they could ask questions about software, anything. Specific places and times. And by the way, as I went through this questioning, I found that other districts were doing the same. And I have also planted the seed with a lot of districts to provide drive-up IT help for parents who really need it. And in Rockford, they completely defeated the digital divide. They had a partnership with Comcast, and they worked hard to find ways to get devices and equipment into homes, hotspots and remote stations. They they took a huge digital divide and eliminated it. So when I asked superintendents what were some of the disruptive innovations that they had, they went on and on. And what I've done here in this, not academy, but this 1-hour workshop is I've put them on these different pages. And when you, at the end of this, you'll get a link and you can download this entire presentation and print it out and get some great ideas from some of these superintendents. And by the way, you can print this out in 2 formats. You can print it out in PowerPoint, or you can print it out in Keynote, whatever you like best. And feel free to use it and take advantage of anything that you see here. That's the purpose of it. I just wanted to highlight a couple. There's pages of these. One of them that I wanted to highlight was IEP meetings via Zoom. I heard from so many superintendents that the IEP meetings are better via Zoom than they not only expected, but in some cases better than they were. And I could understand that for a couple of reasons. I don't think parents are as intimidated when they're on a screen, when there may be 12 people and they're one of the squares, one of the Hollywood squares in the Zoom meeting, and they have the ability to communicate. And also you can get people who may not be able to attend IEP meetings because they're not in that building on that day and now can attend via Zoom. I thought that was a great idea. I also thought the next one I underlined, on the spot board communications, some via Zoom, is a great way of meeting and talking with board members. I understand that you have to check with your attorney on the process of doing this, but sometimes I'm told you can call them together and make announcements and not have a meeting. One district, Lauren Bailey's, they built a TV studio for instruction and communication, and the kids are running it. And you'll see there's just a tremendous number of things that superintendents have shared that are really good ideas that are coming from the COVID chaos. And there's just pages of these. And one of the ones I wanted to highlight on this page is the one kind of in the middle. One superintendent said, of all the changes that we've made, and we've made massive changes throughout our district in many areas. We had a faculty meeting the other day, and about 80% of the changes we made will remain because they've been changes for the better. I talked about disruptive innovations in one of my administrator academies for the IPA back in October. And I asked them, could you share with me some some disruptive innovations during this academy? Could you type them into the chat box? And if it's okay with you, I'd like to share them in future presentations. And so these are from principals, and these are a whole nother list of great ideas about things that are happening because of COVID chaos. Now, this is an hour presentation and I have 3 hours worth of materials. So what I really hope you'll do is that you'll download it and you'll look at these and you will maybe be inspired by some of the things that other districts are doing and maybe things that you could do. There were a couple that really I wanted to give special attention to. The IASA has done just a phenomenal job with the COVID situation, helping superintendents, providing information, providing data. And one of the very best, I've listened to most of these podcasts that the IPA has put out, but one of the very best one came from Carrie Hubry up in O'Fallon District 90, not too far from where I am in Highland. And the district created an engagement campaign where it asked families to become honorary staff members. And just the title of this thing is intriguing. Asking families to become staff members, working with them, recharging your school families and staff. So this page is a way to remind yourself to go to the IASA and pop in and listen to that podcast. And by the way, you're going to find that there's a dozen or so really good podcasts that are pertinent and will help you. If you haven't done that yet, you need to do it. Jennifer Garrison in Vandalia, another one of these bright shining stars of superintendents, told me that Vandalia has done a lot of things, and I just wrote down a few. They've worked with their community, partnering with the YMCA and with one church to provide places for kids to go on home learning days. And these are kids whose parents can't stay at home or whose parents just need to have the kids be somewhere. And this partnership that they have, it's not a school activity, it's a partnership activity, but they're providing the personnel through the care funding, and it's really helped and met the needs of some families. They also are starting a rapid testing program the second semester, and it's just getting off right now, which I think they're doing in the school. I know other schools are doing this too, and if you've not thought about that, you should maybe ask your county health department about it. And they did the digital divide by coming up with community Wi-Fi hubs where people could actually go to parking lots of businesses and use their Wi-Fi. Some very creative ideas. There's also ideas in other places, and I'm always on the lookout for something that teachers or administrators could help would make their job better. And I was looking at a People magazine, and I saw this article about how one teacher just made the in-school situation just a little bit more fun with the plastic screens, and she made the desks in the cars. And the thing about finding examples everywhere is have your staff have a format for your staff to share and bring forth new ideas that people can learn. My own district where I retired from, Highland, I was told about this by my daughter, who's a substitute teacher in the primary. She's a high school Spanish teacher. She's subbing right now in the Highland primary. And she said, you got to hear this, Dad. She said, prior to COVID, the kids would come in the buses and they'd meet in the gymnasium, and they'd be held in the gymnasium for about a half an hour. This is a K through 2 building. And they would wait until school started. And while they were sitting in the cafeteria in their classroom squares, they went through some activities. Well, obviously this could not happen during COVID. So they have this new assistant principal. His name is Connor C. And he came up with this great idea of when the kids come, they'll go right to their room, and a half an hour before school starts or 20 minutes before school starts, they're going to sit there and they're going to watch a video called the morning show. Now, let me just see if I can do this. And I don't know, yeah, here it is. I just want to show you just a little bit of the morning show.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another beautiful day here at Highland Primary School. Today is December the 8th, 2020, and I can't wait to see you today. And guess what? There's only 17 more days till Christmas. All right, everyone, here is the morning show.
Okay, so let me get back in my program. If you are interested, by the way, I wish we could see it. I wish you could just watch the whole 20 minutes because it's phenomenal. Teachers read, and here's the neat thing about these kids. They are glued to the screen. They love the motion. He dances. They have teachers reading. They have games. Every single kid is glued to the screen, and for 20, 25 minutes, they are monitored by this TV show that he puts together every day. He uses something called TouchCast, and Connor has told me that he is way open to having anybody contact him to find out. And I put 3 examples on the screen that you can just click, put them into your browser and click them, and you'll be able to see this show. This is a great disruptive innovation. So when we talk about disruptive innovations, encourage them, recognize them, and celebrate them, because they are the good things that are coming out of the COVID crisis. Now, I want to move to something that I'd like to include in almost all of my presentations, and that is just listing the various resources that are available to you to make your job a little easier. IASA, as I mentioned, if you go to their website, if you're not familiar with IASA website, and I don't know why you wouldn't be if you're a superintendent, they just have so many different things that are available to you that you can go to and get help with. I mentioned the podcast already with Carrie. Mike Sutton has a very good one as well about how they implemented different parts of the online. They've remained in school the whole time and how they've done that. Leadership Matters is a magazine. It's a journal that comes out IASA, and I'm not I've always been a guy that just liked to read the journals. I like to read the IPA stuff, the IASA, the school board, because occasionally, most often you get really pertinent things, but occasionally you get something that is just dynamic. And in this issue, which was the November issue, they had just a ton of stuff in it. So if you go back and look at the November issue, I think you might find that to be very helpful. And there are other sources, like the IASA has a great page of COVID-related information. Going back again to the IASA in that November issue, this is a couple pages that I took out of it, where they talked to some superintendents and they asked them specific questions about how they are handling the COVID. And each one of these superintendents was doing something different. Like one, they were all in school, one, they were all at home, and one, they were doing a hybrid. And you'll get some great information in that issue. Again, here's a in-person, hybrid, remote webinar systems coming out of IASA. These are all pages from IASA. Great things for you to look at and find. And you know, if you're not sure, call IASA, talk to any of the leaders, call IPA, ask them what they have that might relate to the problem that you're going through. The latest issue of Leadership Matters that featured Dr. Leek, and she's a phenomenal superintendent. Just reading her story about how she's handling this is just great. But it also talked a little bit about how Vision 2020 wrapped up. And I think you might find that summary of Vision 2020 to be very helpful in the things that you do. ISA puts out the ION education, and it always has a very good summary of things that are happening. And right now it talks about what schools are doing, you know, every day, what schools are doing and what the state is doing, and it keeps you up to date. I also think it's important for superintendents to be familiar with the School Board Association journal. You know, you need to see what your board members are reading, and you need to make sure that their information and your information is linked together. So just going through that and picking out appropriate articles, and of course, recommending articles to them is extremely important. Another resource that if I was a superintendent right now is one I'd be reading almost every day is the State of Illinois coronavirus response sheet, and the email link for that is up in the right-hand corner. And it talks about where they are right now, what they're doing, what tier they are, what mitigations they're putting in effect. And it makes you stay on top of everything. You get the state information. I know it's important to be connected with your county, and very important to be connected with your health department. IASA also has Capital Watch, and you know, even though the virus and hybrid learning and all these things are taking the forefront right now, you still need to be in sync with what's happening on a legislative basis. I wanted to point out a magazine that I thought would be a great resource and really an informative magazine about viruses. This is back in November. The National Geographic devoted the entire magazine to the virus, not just the COVID virus, but viruses. And in this article, it talks not only about the emotional part of living with COVID, and this is a phenomenal picture of a family that put a piece of plastic on a clothesline, and they had a COVID person that was pretty sick on the other side, and they just needed to have some sort of contact, and each one came up and kissed this person and embraced this person through that screen. But what I liked about this article was it tells you how COVID actually works. And you don't have to be a scientist or a biologist to understand their explanation, but it gives you a better feel about how this virus does attack and why we need to be involved with it. And there's also a great article for educators. It's a letter to my generation. It's written by some young folks talking to other people about what's happening to them and how they're handling it, and why they aren't generation screwed, and why they will overcome. And I think you'll find some great inspiration in that article. There are also other resources that have really stepped up to the plate. The Teaching Channel is one. Apple has a tremendous number of resources. But one of my favorites, and I share it all the time because it's so current, is a site called SmartBrief.com. And I say send your teachers to it, but you need to go to it as well. And if you've not done this, do it. Just write down right now, smartbrief.com, and at some point go and click on it. And you'll find that smartbrief.com is a source that gets information in a variety of different formats. And there's an educational link that has these collection of articles. And that's all it is. It's a collection of current to-date articles. And if they meet your needs, you click on them and you get the full article. And SmartBrief breaks into separate different divisions, SmartBrief Education. And this one I put up here because it had flipped the virtual classroom. Here's SmartBrief on Ed Tech. Well, everybody's getting into tech. And this is a great newsletter that, again, puts forth about 6 to 8 articles. And I can guarantee that you go to some of these and you'll find articles that would be of interest to you and your staff right now. There's SmartBrief on leadership, more for administrators. And it talks about, again, it gives you practices. And then there's the SmartBrief for curriculum development. There's also SmartBrief for National Board. It's prepared by National Board teachers. Go to it, you'll find total resources. One of the highlights of my surveying and asking people how they're surviving was this discussion of communications. And if you've attended any of my academies, you know I'm kind of a communication freak. And I kind of think that the best, most important skill that we have is the ability to communicate and the ability to utilize our communication venues. And right now, social media is something that we need to utilize and we need to take advantage of. And many of you are doing it to share the message. And many of you are doing things very, very creatively. But we need to do more than just communicate, because no matter how we communicate, we need to listen. We can tell people, but unless we're listening to them and responding to them, we're really not communicating. Communication doesn't happen until it's two-way. And during this whole process, a superintendent trying to survive and grow needs to build teams and develop ownership. And all the highlights on this page right now are things I've talked about all through my career. And these are the things that I think you do need to get focused on. And when you download this and print it out and you get to this page, ask yourself, how are you doing with each one of these things? How are you doing with building a team? In one of my books called The School Principals Toolbook, in chapter 9, I talk about how to build a team. But forget my book. Go to John Maxwell's The 17 Essential Qualities of a Team Player. He's the guru of leadership. He knows far more than I do. And this is an excellent, excellent book. And it's a short book, and it's one that I think every superintendent needs to be reading right now, and every principal needs to be reading to see how well are you developing these teams. One of the processes that I really like to push is brainstorming, because brainstorming is a great way to get people together and assimilate ideas and focus on what's happening and how can we use this technology with these third graders? How can we develop our IEPs with Zoom? And let's just brainstorm. So I put some slides in here about brainstorming that I hope might be helpful. And again, when you're talking and you're communicating, one of the things you have to do more than ever is you have to ask questions. How are you doing? How's your family doing? How are you coping? How are your parents doing? Mary, I heard your parents had COVID. You need to know the questions to ask and ask questions. Questions do two things. They make it personal and they show your interest. But questions that are followed up show your strong leadership skill. And I wanted to share with you something I've used all my career. It's called, I named it after myself because I'm the only one I think that really has formalized it. It's called the 3-step evaluation process. Evaluation can be done in 3 simple steps. You ask 3 questions. What did you like best about this experience? What would you have changed, or what was most challenging, or however you want to word it would be the second question. But you never use a negative. You don't say, what did you like least, or something like that. It's, what did you like best? What would you change? And here's the most important question. If you were in charge, what would you do? Because the first one answers the question of what you did right, and the second one points out what maybe could be done better, and the third one says what they think of your leadership. Asking those questions about anything, and you're doing so many things. You're implementing a change, and maybe a week after you implement the change, you just send this little form out and say, hey, let's do a quick evaluation on that change. What'd you like best? What was what was the biggest challenge to this change? And if you were in charge, what would you do differently? And then you take these evaluations and you always follow up. You always give a summary. You always say, this is what I heard. This is what I've learned. And that builds ownership. Man, that's like a half an hour in a normal academy in about 2 minutes. Another thing that so many superintendents shared with me about surviving was this: you need to be compassionate. You need to understand when somebody comes to you and they're so frustrated because they've got these kids at home and they're not handling teaching well, and they're not thinking the kids are learning well, and they're really struggling. You have to understand that they probably are really struggling. And you not only have, we would like to say, well, we can't do much about it. You're just going to have to, buckle up and get to it. You can't. You've got to be compassionate. You've got to listen. You've got to see, maybe ask, what can we do to help? What might be, if they say, well, open up the schools, I know, what realistically can we do to help under these circumstances? Because these are tough times. And if you think it's tough for you, then you really need to put yourself in the shoes of some of the people that are really struggling, trying to manage multiple things, and they're not teachers, and they aren't qualified, and they don't have the skills, and they haven't been trained to deal with the emotional stress of teaching. We need to be compassionate. We need to remember, Dale Carnegie had a great quote: when you're dealing with people, remember that you are not dealing with creatures of logic. You're dealing with creatures of emotions. And sometimes when we're talking in logic and forgetting emotions, we're not communicating. Sometimes we have to latch on to the emotions and then find the logic in the solutions. I ran across an article that I thought was extremely important, and I've shared it with many, many people. It's an article that didn't deal directly with school. It dealt mostly with businesses of all sizes, small and large. But this quote was just so amazing to me. A McKinsey study said 41% of Americans struggle with mental health issues stemming from the pandemic. 41%. But many companies put in their schools remain ill-equipped to address the problem. If this is the case, if 4 out of every 10 of your staff or your families are dealing with some sort of a mental health issue or a stress related to the pandemic, we need to be addressing it. This is an article. I want you can go to this article and click onto it and get it in full detail. It's not a long article, and I've summarized it as best I can. There are 5 steps. 1, you need to open lines of communication so that people can talk. And now we're talking not necessarily about parents, but we're talking about your staff and people within your system. Open the lines of communication. You need to understand the needs, and you need to meet the needs. Now, they talk here about surveys and benefit reports and disability claims and productivity assessments, a lot of metrics, but sometimes you just simply need to hear that they're just not getting teaching, or they're just not being able to manage their time, and maybe provide a resource for them. You also need to know the signs of distress amongst your staff, amongst the people that you're dealing with, amongst your board, amongst your own family. And when you know the signs of distress, that you're able to work with them. You have to make help available. And never has there been a time when superintendents need to be listing and sharing counseling services and mental health facilities and addiction facilities and different things, not just COVID health, but all sorts of health, and make those available. And then finally, you need to embrace and encourage self-care. You need to talk to people. Look, I'm not doing this justice to share it with you in 2 minutes. Take some time and read it, and understand that you're the person in charge. You're the one. Maybe you set up some sort of a way that parents can call your guidance people, or maybe you have a Zoom meetings where parents can log in. If you go back to those disruptive innovations, there's some districts that are doing exactly that. They're having a call the counselor night, or talk to this person night, and people can just get a link and Zoom in and be involved in a conversation. You definitely need to take care of yourself. And this is not just physically, this is mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and professionally. You need to take care of yourself. You need to make sure that you are able and structured to do the best job. And when you are, you will make sure that other people do it. And when you do make those tough decisions, you need to ask yourself, are those decisions the right ones? Are they ethical decisions? And I've shared this many, many times because it's so fundamentally powerful. It came from a book called The Power of Ethical Management. It's the 3 steps to determining whether a decision is ethical. After you make the decision, you ask yourself, is it legal? Is it legal, like the state law, like your school code, like past practices, like your handbook? Does it follow that? Is it legal? Number 2, is it balanced? Balance means, have you made the decision that looks at all sides of the equation and is win-win? And remember, win-win, it's not one side wins and the other side wins. Win-win is when both sides walk away feeling that you've done it the best way. You've done it the fairest way. So is it legal? Is it balanced? And the third question is, how do you feel about it? What's your gut reaction? Do you go to bed at night saying, gosh, that was the wrong decision? If you do, wake up in the morning and reevaluate it. I can't tell you how many times in my career I've come back the next day and said, I want to talk about this again. I just don't feel like we've looked at all the sides, or we've looked at it, or I don't feel like I made the right decision. And so you've got to ask those 3 questions. Is it legal? Is it balanced? How does it make you feel? I love this quote: a gentleman's agreement won't work without 2 gentlemen. Well, they don't have to both be men. You've got to get to the point where 2 people agree. Gosh, like our country, where both sides can shake hands and just say, there's the good of people that has to be in the forefront. And that's your job right now, is finding that balance with people. And I love this Bible verse. It says, do everything without complaining or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure. Try to cut down on the complaining and the arguing, and try to walk away or resolve those. There's too much to do and too little time. Finally, in this session, I wanted to talk about the legality of COVID. And the legality of COVID is something that is kind of an ongoing morphing process, because the laws are changing, the rules are changing, how many days you're in session, how many hours you're in session, what's an absentee, what's not an absentee, what's discipline, can you pass a kid for this or that? Some of the things that we've adhered to for years and years and years are being tempered. So I wanted to share with you from some of the information from the best. So I asked the experts. I went to 2 people who I think are really good, the best. One is a school attorney that deals with school districts, and one is an administrator attorney who I've worked with, wrote a book with, and know personally, and that's Brian Schwartz. And Brian Schwartz is the Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel of the Illinois Principals Association, and he looks way more handsome than this picture. It's the best I could do. And Brian put together a program that he was kind enough, and the IPA was generous enough to allow me to include in this presentation. This is an entire program on COVID-19 guidance, legal guidance. I'm not going to go through it. We've only got 8 minutes to go. But what I want to do is I want you to look at the topics that are included in this program and just land on a few pages so that you can see what's here and you can download it. The daily symptom screening basics. And I took out of Brian's program that he sent me, I took out the IDPH chart that he had, and I put in the new one. This is this week's, because it's imperative that you have the newest chart. This one came out January 4th, interim guidance. I think it's the latest one, but you have to have the newest one if you're going to be looking at anything legal. He talks about student discipline, and he gives you tips on student discipline. He also talks about taking attendance during remote learning. He talks about how you contact DCFS and deal with child neglect issues, or issues that you think may be happening, or places where you think having a kid home all the time could be dangerous, and what you need to do. He talks about e-learning and student privacy considerations, gives you 8 tips. He also has a section on special education considerations. You need to look at these pages and go to these tips on special education. These are dynamic and very helpful to you. And finally, he ends up with staffing considerations, what a staff needs to know, and things that you need to know about dealing with the staff. So I wanted to thank Brian Schwartz for sharing that and giving us permission to utilize it. I also talked to Ann Noble from Stiefel, and I said, what are 3 things that you can tell superintendents that they need to know right now during this time? And she said, this is time when interest rates are just at an all-time low for bonding, and you need to really look at your refinancing. You need to look at the options for transferring funds, because some of those options are opened up a little bit during this time. And she recommends that you negotiate 1-year contracts so that you maintain some flexibility. Again, I mentioned that I talked to another attorney. I talked to Stan Eisenhammer, who's a partner at Hodges, Louisi, Eisenhammer, Rodick and Cohen. And I asked Stan, I said, what can you share with me? And Stan looked over Brian's presentation, and he said, Brian really has covered things so well, but let me just give you these 3 things. He said, make sure that you're using the most current data. And that might mean that you check that data on a daily basis. And when it comes to discipline, discipline is handled differently, and you need to maybe seek advice from your district's attorney if you're running into situations that are unique. Stan says that the ISBE guidance, it doesn't always fit situations, and maybe you need to look at legal advice. And he also encourages you to work with the county health department and to talk to them about processes that would increase teachers and staff vaccinations. Be proactive. If they're not happening in your district, be proactive to get them to happen, because it's imperative that teachers get vaccinated. And I also wanted to include my own comment here. We know that substitutes are of short supply, and it's a crisis in many districts. But do you realize that if you provide vaccinations, you may also increase the willingness of people to come and substitute? So this is something that superintendents need to be looking at in their counties. Is there a way to get substitute teachers vaccinated along with their regular teachers, so that they would be more interested in coming? So let me wrap up by talking about what's next. What can we expect? Jim Broadway and Brent Brent Clark from IASA, many of them have talked about the fact that we need to expect our finances to be hurt. The Illinois state budget is at some point going to cut school funding, and federal funds are, we hope, will carry us, but we have to be looking down the road. Brent has constant communications about what's happening in the General Assembly, and we need to remind our legislators that this is a time when we need funds. We cannot have a loss of funds. One of the other things that's going to happen is vaccinations. How are we going to handle vaccinations? How are we going to handle kids that have been vaccinated when that time comes? How are we going to handle situations where someone says, I've been vaccinated, I can do this, or I haven't been vaccinated, I don't want to do this. COVID cases are not shrinking, they're growing. Vaccine availability is going to improve, and the new normal, the normal that we have now, won't be the normal. So superintendents need to be talking strategy. They need to be talking plans. They need to be looking at vaccinations now. A third thing that's very imperative that you be aware of is that there could very likely be a personnel shift. There could be a loss of teachers from the profession. There was a poll conducted last November by the IEA. They polled 1,300 members, a sample, as this little clip says, out of the 135,000 that they thought was representative. 1/3 of those people were considering leaving their profession. Retirement requests have escalated. The number of teachers coming into the system is diminished. You need to be looking at what could be a real problem with personnel. And then another thing, which is not necessarily a bad thing, is that we're going to be rethinking the use of Zoom. We're going to be doing more Zoom, not less of it. Less conferences, more in face-to-face, and more Zoom conferences. And we need to look at that in the future. So let me just wrap up with a couple ideas here. People may hear your words, but they feel your attitude. And as many superintendents said at the beginning, you need to be compassionate. You need to be caring. You need to develop a strong attitude. You need to encourage your teachers. You need to let them know they're making a difference. And when you get a chance to read this slide and possibly copy and paste the link below, it will take you to this page. And when you get to that page, there's a 4-minute movie, and that movie talks about what we have learned from the virus. And the neat thing about this movie is that it says that multiple have come together, multiple areas of study have worked together to not only come up with the vaccinations, but solve many more problems that we didn't even expect. And this is in direct response to your teachers. It's your teachers who are providing kids with the knowledge and the information to make the difference ahead. In a gentle way, you can shake the world. But this is a time when we need to be not only gentle, but we need to be strong. Brent Clark kind of concludes things with a couple quotes. He'd encourage every one of you to set short, medium, and long-term goals with a bright dot out on the horizon that signals the pandemic is behind us. We need every superintendent standing when this pandemic ends, and we can make that happen if we help each other along the way. So this is a great story, but I just don't have time for it. I want to just end with this. Don't face COVID alone. You follow the words of one another, love one another, accept one another, encourage one another, forgive one another, honor one another, instruct one another, serve one another, submit to one another. And when you do, the light at the end of that tunnel will become brighter and brighter and brighter. I do a presentation called Surviving COVID Chaos, not quite as rushed as this one, for teachers and staff. If you're interested, let me know. Here are the links. And I think when I turn it over to Arlen, I think Arlen is also going to put on your screen some links that you can use to find this presentation either on PowerPoint or on Keynote. Thank you very much for attending. If there's anything I can do for you ever, just feel free to contact me.
Jim, thank you very much for all this wonderful information and resources for surviving the COVID chaos. I want to thank our partner, the Illinois Association of School Administrators and the Illinois Principals Association, for helping to put on this webinar today. I'm going to paste a link to access the evaluation, which will then trigger the ISB evidence of completion form if you're interested in getting a 1-hour professional development credit for attending this workshop. So I'm going to first post that into the chat. That's going to take you out of Zoom and into your web browser, and you can complete that evaluation. And then I'm also going to post the links that Jim mentioned to the PowerPoint and the Keynote. First will come the PowerPoint and the Keynote, and then I will follow up with an email to all participants with these links and access to the recording as well.